Dear God, give us the wisdom to see beyond appearances. Help us listen more than we speak. Let truth shape our hearts before it shapes our judgments. And when love shows up, may we have the courage to meet it with honesty. Amen. You ever told yourself you'd never fall for a lie? You protect your heart. You ask the hard questions. You think you're careful. Until you look down one morning and realize the man holding your child is the same man your entire career was built to expose. My name is Jen. I'm a writer, and I've spent most of my life telling the world that money ruins love. That real power never shows up with tenderness. That the more a man earns, the less he listens. I wrote articles that made CEOs squirm in their seats. I built my name on truth. Clean, honest, direct. I didn't hate the rich, but I never trusted them. Not for a second. I thought love could only grow where money stayed silent. Then he walked into my life. He didn't come in a suit, no watch, no driver, no charm that felt practiced. He was soft-spoken. Paint-stained hands, messy kitchen, broken shoes, and eyes that didn't interrupt me when I talked. He called himself Leo. He sold paintings that never sold. He made meals that didn't cost much. He held my waist when I stirred soup. He pressed his forehead to mine when the nights got too loud. He never rushed me. He never pulled away. He felt safe. I trusted him more than I ever trusted anyone, until the morning I held court documents in one hand and our newborn in the other. The name listed on the indictment wasn't Leo. It was Eli Throne, a trillion-dollar empire, the man behind the tech giant I was investigating, the man I had written a viral expose about, the man I had sworn I'd never forgive, if I ever met him. The man I loved never existed, not the way I thought. And the worst part, I made him hide my words, my judgments, my beliefs. They didn't just shape my work. They shaped the fear in the man I fell for. They taught him that the only way I could love him was if he disappeared. So he did. You'd think I would have screamed, thrown something, cried. But the moment I realized who he really was, I didn't do any of those things. I sat still. My fingers gripped the court file, the same fingers he kissed every night before sleep. The betrayal wasn't just in what he hid. It was in why he thought he had to. He never chased the spotlight. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who posted on yachts or sat on panels with buzzwords. He had built an empire, then erased himself from it. Quietly, deliberately, because he read my words, because he feared the woman who said power and love could never live in the same room. He became a man I could love, but not the man he was, and I had no idea what to do with that. Let me tell you what broke me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the lies. It wasn't even the headlines once the world found out who I had been sleeping beside. It was this, the fear in his eyes when I found out, the shame, the heartbreak, the silence that screamed, I didn't want to lose you. He didn't run. He sat down. He didn't explain with arrogance or excuses. He explained with grief, like a man who had finally accepted that the truth would cost him everything. And maybe it should have. But I was holding our child, and I was tired of believing that love had no room for contradiction. I built my life on truth, but I fell for the biggest lie. And the worst part, I understood why he told it. So now, I'm asking you, what would you do if the love of your life turned out to be the billionaire you built your whole voice against? Would you walk? Would you fight? Would you forgive? Or would you realize, like I did, that sometimes truth and love are not enemies? They're twins, and they both demand honesty. From both sides. This is the story of how I fell in love with the man I swore I'd never trust. The story of a child born from love, and a secret born from fear. But mostly, this is the story of what happens when your beliefs meet your heart, and neither one wants to back down. Welcome to Mr. Victor Storytime. If this story already has you thinking, like it did me, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories that challenge, inspire, and move us. Now let me take you back. To where this story begins, not with a lie, but with a woman who believed she couldn't be lied to. Brooklyn didn't raise quiet girls. It raised girls who watched closely, learned fast, and didn't expect the world to hand them comfort. Jen Van grew up in a second-floor apartment above a laundromat, where the scent of detergent and steam filled every corner of their small space. Her mother worked back-to-back shifts at the same hospital cafeteria she once cleaned as a teenager. Her father left before Jen turned 7, a man whose promises faded faster than his cologne. There were no safety nets in her world, only patterns. She learned them early. She saw which families got evicted first. She noticed how quickly the black-owned shops turned into frozen yogurt chains. She watched tenants get priced out overnight, while developers smiled on the news. She heard words like revitalization and urban upgrade, while her neighbors cried packing boxes shut. No one needed to tell Jen that wealth didn't come with empathy. She felt it every time the rent went up, every time another bus route got cut, every time her mother's hands cracked from scrubbing trays in winter. By the time Jen was in high school, she understood something most adults still denied. Money doesn't just change people, it erases them. She didn't speak this in anger. She spoke it like fact. And she wrote it. At 17, Jen began submitting essays to community journals. Not dramatic pieces, clean, focused writing that named what she saw. She didn't rant. She mapped behavior. Landlords who mysteriously lost tenant applications from black families. Companies that ran diversity campaigns while laying off older staff of color. Developers promising community centers while raising rent across 6 blocks. Her writing wasn't flashy, but it hit nerves. Professors invited her to speak in lecture halls. Local activists quoted her. By the time she turned 23, Jen had built a growing following online. People who didn't just read her work, but waited for it. She stayed in Brooklyn, even when jobs elsewhere offered more. She didn't crave status. She craved honesty. Her voice was sharp, but her presence was calm. She wasn't confrontational. She was relentless. And at the core of every piece she wrote lived one belief. Wealth without awareness destroys everything it touches. It flattens neighborhoods. It shifts policies. It breaks families. And worst of all, it pretends it didn't. It started with a headline Jen almost didn't keep. The empty hearts of the 1% felt too obvious, too clean, too expected. But she was tired, and it fit. The piece wasn't angry. It was precise. She detailed how emotional disconnection fuels the ultra-wealthy, how billionaires become experts at performance, smiles, charity, press releases, while struggling to form real emotional bonds. She compared patterns across interviews, memoirs, and leaked boardroom recordings. She never mentioned names. She didn't need to. Her point wasn't who did it. It was how many did, and why it kept working. She wrote, "To accumulate wealth at that scale requires emotional distance, from consequences, from people, and often from love. It's not the wealth that kills love. It's the habits used to gain it." The internet caught fire. Within 48 hours, the piece had over 6 million reads. Executives at firms she never mentioned made quiet calls to PR firms. Board members sent emails to each other with, "Was this about us?" in the subject line. Anonymous tips flooded her inbox, but Jen didn't respond to gossip. She stayed grounded. She showed up to her part-time teaching job. She walked to the corner store. She brewed her own coffee. Yet everything had changed. Suddenly, she was invited to speak at universities. Think tanks emailed her, asking for off-the-record chats. A major online publication offered her a featured column. She didn't say yes to everything, but she didn't say no either. Jen wasn't interested in being famous. She was interested in being heard. And the more she wrote, the more she made one thing clear: love cannot grow where accountability dies. And in the world of unchecked wealth, accountability was always the first to go. She believed this fully. She stood on it like stone. And she had no idea that across the country, a man read that same essay every single night. Eli Throne sat at the top of a mountain most people never even saw. He didn't do press. He didn't do photos. He didn't even attend half the board meetings in person. From his private office in San Francisco, he could see 5 different skylines on a clear day, one for every major city where his company ran things quietly. Tethelgard, a tech empire worth over $1 trillion. Software that touched everything from logistics to classified defense contracts. His name didn't trend. His products did. He liked it that way. He had learned early that public attention was a blade. It cut you no matter which side you held it from. But when the empty hearts of the 1% hit the web, he didn't just read it. He printed it. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. He didn't rage. He didn't scoff. He broke, slowly. Each paragraph wasn't an accusation. It was an X-ray. She wasn't ranting. She was right. Eli wasn't some villain in a tower. He had tried. He had dated women who claimed to love him, only to request stock options before anniversaries. He had friends who only invited him to events when cameras would be there. He had family members who hadn't called him without asking for something in years. And the worst part, he believed Jen's essay more than he believed any of them. He sat in the dark with the lights off, screens black, phones silenced. The essay folded on his desk like scripture, and he whispered the same question again and again. Would someone ever love me if they didn't know who I was? That night, Eli made the first decision that would change everything. He didn't tell anyone at first, not his assistant, not the legal team, not even the small circle of advisors who managed his private assets. Eli simply stopped showing up. He delayed board meetings. He cancelled quarterly briefings. He quietly authorized proxies to handle public filings. And then he started building a new life, not online, in the shadows. He hired an anonymous task team to create a digital ghost trail, old student loan records, unpaid rent slips, fake art school admissions. He rented a rundown studio in a coastal town 3 states away. He bought second-hand clothes from donation bins and stained them with real paint. He learned to cook like someone who had to stretch groceries over 5 days. He changed his name to Leo, a name no one had ever called him, a name with no press history, no board records, no algorithms. He hired a struggling actor to play an ex-roommate who always had money problems. He let the landlord complain about overdue payments. He wore jackets that smelled of turpentine and kept his phone off during the day. And he read Jen's essay, again and again. This wasn't a performance. It was a purge. He wasn't trying to test anyone. He wasn't running a game. He just needed to know, was he capable of being loved? Without the noise, without the brand, without the weight of Tethelgard. He traded glass towers for cracked windows, boardrooms for bus stops, luxury for loneliness, and he waited. He didn't expect to be found. He didn't even expect to be seen. But the woman he'd been reading for months, she was about to walk into his life in the most unexpected way. And when she did, everything he built, everything he erased, would face the one thing money could never prepare him for: real love. By October 2023, Jen had learned to chase truth past headlines. One zoning story had caught her eye, a cluster of permits issued quietly along the East Coast, involving big money tied to small towns. It didn't match usual development trends. No large names, no press releases, just empty lots and strange buys under shell companies. She followed the trail. That trail led to a sleepy coastal town she'd never visited before. It wasn't the kind of place that made the news. No high-rise buildings, no digital billboards, just rusted docks, weathered homes, and a main street where people still nodded hello. She rented a modest walk-up. 2 rooms, no central heat, the kind of place where the windows stuck and the floors creaked after every step. She brought her notebooks, her recorder, and a small laptop that never left her side. Every morning, Jen walked the stretch between town hall and zoning records. She knocked on doors. She asked quiet questions. People were friendly but vague, polite but guarded. Money was moving through town, but no one admitted to knowing who or why. Jen didn't rush. She took her time walking the streets, studying local murals, watching which businesses stayed open after sunset and which didn't. She noticed the patterns. What she didn't expect was how still her mind felt here. She had been chasing corruption for years, but this town gave her something else. Silence. Not the cold kind, the honest kind, the kind that made space for questions she hadn't asked in a while. She spent evenings with her feet up, tea in hand, writing in long paragraphs, drafts that felt different from her usual pieces. Less fire, more reflection. One night, a colleague called to check in. "You sound relaxed," he said. Jen smiled. Weird, right? But that night, the calm broke. She left the cafe late, the one place with decent Wi-Fi, and decided to take a shortcut through a side street. It was a choice that would change everything. The wind shifted the moment she turned off the main road. The alley was narrow, wet, the kind of shortcut you only take when you know the area, which she didn't. She had barely taken 10 steps when a sudden thud echoed ahead. A man's shout followed. Then, a grunt, a shuffle, a pair of quick, fading footsteps. Jen froze, not out of fear, but instinct. She edged closer, scanning the alley. A man lay slumped against the wall. His breathing was uneven, his shirt collar darkened with blood near the cheek. No weapon, no attacker in sight. "Hey," she said firmly, crouching without hesitation. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. Just barely. Jen pulled out her phone. Her fingers worked fast, calling emergency services, giving the location. "The man," his voice cracked. "Don't call police." But she ignored him. "You need help. Just breathe." He blinked slowly, trying to sit up. Jen steadied him with one hand. She pulled a napkin from her bag. It still had a coffee stain, and gently pressed it to his cheek. The cut was shallow, but the impact had rattled him. His knees wobbled when he tried to move. "You were mugged," she said. "Stay still." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." The ambulance arrived fast, faster than she expected in a town this size. Jen stayed with him, gave a full statement, even walked alongside the stretcher as he was lifted into the vehicle. When the medic asked if she was family, she paused, then gave her name anyway. He looked at her once before the doors closed, a long, quiet look filled with something soft. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded. "You're welcome." He didn't smile, but something about the way he said it made her pause before walking home. 2 days later, Jen returned to the same cafe. She hadn't been thinking about him, not actively. But when she saw the man from the alley sitting near the back, a book in hand and a bruised cheek, she stopped in the doorway. He looked up. Their eyes met. This time, he smiled. Jen hesitated, then walked over. "Better now?" she asked, motioning to the seat across from him. He nodded, still sore, but walking straight. "Good," she said, sliding into the chair. "I'm Jen." He already knew, but he simply replied, "Leo." She didn't know that name wasn't his. He didn't know how long she'd stay. What followed wasn't a flirty exchange. It wasn't charged or theatrical. It was easy. Jen asked questions in between sips of black coffee. Leo answered in short, thoughtful phrases. He said he painted. She asked what. He shrugged. "Things that don't sell." He laughed at his own joke. She didn't, but she smiled. He had hands like someone who worked with tools, not keyboards. Fingers slightly stained, nails trimmed but uneven. She noticed how he listened, not waiting to talk, just listening. She talked about the town, the strange land deals, the silence around the money. Leo tilted his head, like he was learning something new. "You don't seem like someone who just passes through," he said quietly. "I'm not," she replied, "but I never stay." He nodded like he understood, but inside, he hoped that might change. The cafe emptied slowly. Their cups went cold. Still, they sat. Silence didn't feel heavy between them. It felt earned. Jen excused herself finally, stood, reached for her coat, but before she walked out, she said, "Same time tomorrow?" Leo's voice barely rose. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, their rhythm formed quietly. They met most mornings, sometimes afternoons, sometimes evenings if Leo offered to cook. Jen didn't ask for much. She showed up, told stories, listened, watched. Leo didn't perform. He didn't try to impress, and that's what terrified him. He was being seen, not for what he had, but for what he wasn't. Jen opened up more after the third week. They were walking along the shore, wind cutting across the rocks. She had her scarf wrapped tight, her hands deep in her coat pockets. "You ever think about how money changes people?" she asked, not looking at him. Leo kept his eyes ahead. "All the time. It's not just about what it buys," she continued. "It's about what it demands. The silence, the performance." He said nothing. Jen exhaled sharply. "I don't trust men with real money. Not the kind you inherit, not the kind you hide." Leo's chest tightened. She didn't know, but her words struck deep. He had spent years trying to disappear from that very category, not because he hated who he was, but because he knew how little she would tolerate it. He changed the subject carefully. "Your work," he said, "does it ever make you lonely?" Jen looked at him for the first time that afternoon. "Sometimes, but I'd rather be alone with truth than held by someone who lies." Leo nodded, his smile strained. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his studio, wondering how long the quiet could last before the weight of the lie buried the one thing he wanted to protect: her trust. Every morning, Leo followed a script no one could see. Before Jen ever knocked on his door or met him at the cafe, he made sure his life looked exactly how she needed it to. The cracked linoleum floors of his rented studio, chosen on purpose. The sink that dripped, left unfixed for effect. Even the one oil painting he displayed on the wall, a city street under fog, was designed to look like it failed to sell. He had hired a contact months before, a burned-out gallery assistant with a drinking problem, to reject his submissions by email. "Sorry, Leo, not what our clients are looking for right now. Too niche for the current buyers. Maybe try again next season." Leo made sure Jen saw those rejection letters casually, once when he forgot to close his laptop. She never asked about them. She only gave a soft, empathetic nod and changed the subject. He kept cash in a coffee can above his fridge, never more than a few crumpled bills at a time. His studio supplies were mostly remnants from storage: cheap brushes, old canvas boards, leftover pigment tubes. Everything had to appear earned through scraping, not strategy. His car didn't start half the time. He let that be the truth. The landlord paid under the table, thousands more than market rent, just to grumble when Jen was around. "You still behind, Leo?" The man would bark from the hallway. Leo would sigh, rub his neck and mumble, "I'm working on it." It was all fake, but the exhaustion from maintaining it, very real. He slept lightly, half afraid Jen would arrive unannounced and catch a slip, a paper, a logo, a phone call. He didn't paint to sell. He painted to keep the illusion alive. The deeper they connected, the harder he worked to preserve the simplicity she found comfort in. His fake life was built like scaffolding, carefully placed, visually believable, and held together by lies. And yet, even in that fiction, one thing was real. He wanted her to stay. One evening, Jen reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded list and asked, "You coming with me or staying behind?" Leo raised a brow. "Where?" "Grocery store." "I'm cooking tonight." He hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to." That night was the first time she paid, not because he asked, not because he lacked, but because she didn't see it as a transaction, she saw it as contribution. Leo tried to object at checkout. His fingers hovered over his wallet, half-hearted, but Jen didn't even glance. "You'll cook next time," she said, grabbing the bags. "Your turn." From that point on, they fell into a rhythm. She'd bring small things: apples, rice, seasonings he never seemed to have. He'd offer leftovers, reheated with care. Meals were shared on the floor, between two mismatched cushions and a second-hand radio that barely worked. She teased him about using plastic forks. He'd shrug and say, "Real silverware feels too formal." Their closeness wasn't built in one night. It was built in little things. The way she left her scarf hanging over his chair. The way he wrote her name in pencil along the corner of a half-finished canvas. The way she looked at his bare feet and said, "You need socks." Like real ones. They didn't rush. There were no declarations. No staged surprises. Just presence. When Jen began falling asleep on his couch more often than her own bed, he didn't press. He brought her a blanket. He lowered the music. He let her stay. She started talking about things that didn't fit in her articles. How her mother used to hum while folding laundry. How she never cried when her father left. How silence wasn't something she feared. It was something she respected. Leo listened with a stillness that didn't ask for more. And Jen, for the first time in years, didn't feel the need to protect her truth like armor. The problem wasn't the lie. It was how easy it had become to live inside it. Leo would wake before Jen, sit on the fire escape with his coffee, and stare into the street with one thought looping behind his eyes. If I tell her, I lose her. Every day that passed, the line between pretending and living blurred further. He laughed at her jokes, not because he was playing a role, but because he genuinely found her funny. He looked forward to her texts, her observations, the way she noticed things other people missed. He started painting differently, not to sell, not to impress, but to reflect her, her thoughts, her rhythm. But every time she said something about trust, about honesty, about building love on clear ground, it tore at him. He'd nod, he'd agree, and inside, he'd break a little more. She had no idea that the coat hanging by the door was worth more than the apartment's annual rent. That the art friend, who once dropped by with groceries, was actually his security contact. He had once promised himself that if she ever said the words "I love you," he'd confess everything. But when she finally did, late at night, her voice half asleep, her hand pressed gently to his chest, he didn't answer. He kissed her forehead and said, "I know." He wasn't proud. He wasn't smug. He was terrified. Because now, it wasn't about a test. It wasn't about disappearing wealth or escaping a public name. It was about the fact that this woman, who hated everything he once represented, had chosen him. And he didn't know if that choice would survive the truth. That night, the rain came slow. Not loud enough to distract, just enough to make the room feel smaller, warmer. Jen stood in the kitchen, barefoot, hair wrapped, wearing a faded shirt he didn't recognize. It might have been his. She looked at him from across the space and said, "I don't want perfect. I want present." Leo didn't answer with words. He stepped toward her, not fast, not eager. He let his hand settle gently at the side of her face. She leaned into it, not for support, but to say yes. There were no fireworks, no scripted moments. He traced the line of her jaw like she might vanish if he moved too fast. She touched the curve of his back, grounding him in the moment. They moved slowly, deliberately, like people who knew pain and weren't afraid to be gentle with each other. No wine, no silk sheets, no soundtrack, just breath. Shared space. Two people who had walked through years of silence, finally speaking without sound. When they lay on the floor afterward, their legs tangled and their fingers still interlocked, she didn't ask where he came from. He didn't offer anything untrue. Jen turned toward him and said, "This feels like home." He closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, Eli, hidden deep beneath Leo, wished he could stay. Jen didn't often talk about her past. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because most people didn't understand it. But with Leo, something felt different. Safe. They were sitting on his floor again, late at night, an old jazz record humming behind them. The heater clanked like it always did. The lights were dimmed, not by design, but because one bulb had blown, and neither of them had replaced it. She leaned back on her palms, legs stretched out, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You know," she started, "my block threw the best cookouts in summer." Leo looked over, eyes focused. "I'm talking full sidewalk shut down. Uncle Terry with the ribs, Miss Clara with that cornbread that made grown men cry, water balloons, boom boxes, lawn chairs everywhere. Her voice was soft, but charged with color. Not nostalgia, memory. There was music all day, aunties laughing so loud it felt like medicine, kids dancing without knowing what pride looked like, but feeling it anyway. Leo smiled. Sounds like a movie. Jen shook her head. It was survival, but it didn't feel like struggle. It felt like joy that refused to disappear. She told him how her mother used to plait her hair by the window at night, how her neighbor once climbed a power pole to hook the block back up after a blackout, how her community taught her to watch who you love, but never forget who raised you. No one had much, she said. But we shared everything. She paused. I think that's why I don't flinch at simplicity, why I don't need things to feel whole. Leo studied her, this woman who had found strength not by pushing through pain, but by holding on to joy when the world tried to strip it. He said nothing. He just reached for her hand. And Jen, in that moment, didn't feel like she had to explain anything else. A few days later, Leo took her to a quiet park on the edge of town. It wasn't much. Some old benches, 2 tilted picnic tables, a fountain that hadn't worked in months. But it had trees, and for Leo, that meant air, space. They sat under a low branch. The sun was soft. The wind moved slow. Jen rested her head on his shoulder. You ever get tired of trying? He didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice quieter than usual, he said, I was raised to be excellent, all the time. There wasn't room for mistakes. Jen straightened slightly, curious. I was the quiet kid in rooms full of people who expected me to lead by age 10, not asked. Expected. He didn't say family. He didn't say company, but Jen listened like he had. They didn't praise effort, just outcomes. You either made it, or you didn't matter. His jaw clenched, but not from anger, from memory. I stopped asking how I felt about things, started asking what I was supposed to be doing, who I was supposed to be impressing. Even when no one was looking, Jen didn't interrupt. Pressure, he said, doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes dressed as opportunity. That line hit her. He continued, careful. There were days I'd look in the mirror and not recognize my own reflection, not because I didn't like what I saw, but because I couldn't tell if I ever chose it. Jen reached for his hand. He let her hold it. She whispered, That's the loneliest sentence I've ever heard. Leo felt his throat tighten. She didn't ask for details, didn't press for names, didn't demand clarity. That made it harder. He wanted to tell her everything, but he knew he couldn't, because if he did, he'd have to unwrite the life she'd come to trust. So he let her believe he was just a man with a past, not a man with a secret name. It came one night over lentils and rice, simple dinner, quiet playlist, no background noise, just the sound of 2 people trying to let the day settle around them. Jen was reading an article on her tablet, her brow furrowed. She closed it suddenly and exhaled. You know what still gets me, she said. Leo looked up. The way people think money solves everything, like it can buy back trust, or repair damage it caused. It never does. Leo listened, heart slowing. I've seen it ruin marriages, turn friends into strangers, silence entire families. She wasn't angry. She was tired. He nodded once, unsure what to say. Jen looked at him, her eyes steady. Love fails when money leads. His stomach sank. She said it like she had said it before, maybe in her articles, maybe in interviews, but now it was personal. Leo placed his fork down. I agree, he managed, but his voice was thin. She didn't notice, or maybe she gave him grace. She returned to her food. But Leo couldn't eat another bite, because the woman sitting across from him, the one who had just opened her childhood to him, the one who trusted him enough to share her table and her bed, had unknowingly named the thing he feared most, not being rich, being exposed, not because he didn't want her to know, but because her knowing might end them. He washed the dishes in silence that night, longer than needed, water running until his fingers numbed. And when Jen called from the other room, You okay? He lied. Yeah. Just thinking. By the next week, Leo had done something he promised himself he wouldn't. He made a call. Not to his assistant, not to legal, but to someone on the private side of his world, a logistics contact who'd worked discreet jobs before. "I need a favor," he said. The request wasn't complex. He wanted someone to show up pretending to be a struggling artist friend, someone Jen might meet casually, who could talk about rejection, failed showcases, unpaid commissions. He wanted more texture to his story, more reality in the fiction. A man arrived 2 days later. Played the role perfectly. "Leo's been at this for years," the man said over coffee, shaking his head. "Market's brutal, but he's got soul. I tell him that all the time." Jen believed it. She smiled warmly, encouragingly. "He does." Later that night, Leo sat alone in his studio, paintbrush idle in his hand. This wasn't about manipulation. It was desperation. Every truth she believed about him had been curated. Every moment she admired was part of a story he constructed, not out of malice, but survival. He began staging new failures, pretending to receive emails he wrote himself, turning down offers that never existed. He created setbacks to stay believable. The lie wasn't just in what he hid, it was now in what he invented. Every new layer made the weight harder to carry. And still, he couldn't stop, because with every act of fiction came one real, brutal fact: he loved her more than he'd ever loved anyone. And he was sure, if she found out who he truly was, she'd leave. Not because of the wealth, but because he lied to protect it. It happened on a Sunday morning. Jen woke up later than usual. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Leo had already gone out for his walk, leaving her with his sweatshirt and the lingering smell of roasted coffee grounds. She sat up, stretched, and paused. There it was again. The heaviness, the subtle nausea, the way her body felt like it was whispering something before she could find the language for it. She had brushed it off all week, late nights, skipped meals, stress. But now, alone, she couldn't ignore it. She grabbed her bag and walked to the corner store with the faded awning. Bought one test, then another, just in case. Back home, she sat on the edge of the tub, hands trembling, heart racing. She wasn't scared. But she wasn't steady either. 5 minutes, that's all it took. 2 lines. Clear, bold, unmistakable. Pregnant. Jen didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just stared, like her world had shifted 1 inch. But that inch rewrote everything. She didn't hear Leo return until the door clicked softly. "Hey," he called out. "You still in bed?" She didn't answer. He walked into the bathroom and stopped at the door. Jen didn't look up. She simply held up the test. Leo froze. His mouth parted, but no sound came. The silence between them stretched so tight it nearly broke. Jen whispered, "I don't know how to feel." He sat beside her slowly. Neither of them moved for a long while. Inside, Leo's thoughts spiraled, but his body stayed still. Because right now, she needed presence, not explanations, not fear, not confessions, just him. So, that's what he gave, even though his chest burned with the weight of what he hadn't told her. He placed a hand on hers and said the one thing he truly meant: "We'll figure this out together." That night, Jen didn't cook. She couldn't focus. Leo didn't suggest takeout. He didn't bring out wine. He boiled water, made tea, and left it on the table between them without a word. They sat side by side, not across from each other, beside, close, but not pressed. The air between them wasn't heavy, it was waiting. Jen was the first to speak. "I thought I was done with surprises." Leo looked at her. "You're not alone." "I know," she whispered. I didn't expect this. Not now. Not this way." He nodded slowly. "It's okay to be scared." "I'm not scared," she said, eyes steady. "I'm awake." Leo exhaled. She turned to face him fully. "What do you want?" He paused. Not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it more real. "I want to be here," he said. "For you. For the baby. For whatever this becomes." Jen didn't cry, but her voice thinned. "I don't want pity. I don't want a performance." "You won't get one," he said gently. She nodded. They began making lists. Doctors, vitamins, what had to change, what had to wait. Jen, ever the planner, began jotting on a notepad. Leo watched her, the way her mind moved with intention, with purpose, and when her hand finally slowed, she looked up at him. "Do you think we can do this?" Leo didn't flinch. "I think we already are." There was no grand speech, no music in the background, just two people building a future in real time, step by step, without pretending they had it all figured out. That night, when they lay in bed, Jen placed his hand over her stomach and whispered, "Whatever happens, this life, this baby, starts with truth." Leo swallowed hard, holding that truth like a secret burning in his palm. Jen never stopped working. She adjusted deadlines, paced herself better, took naps when her body demanded rest. But she didn't pause her voice. Leo admired that. He, on the other hand, became obsessed with routines. Every morning, he sliced fruit before she woke up. Every appointment, he confirmed twice. He downloaded pregnancy apps he didn't understand and spent nights reading forums full of acronyms that made his head spin. Jen teased him once, when she caught him rearranging the pantry. "I'm pregnant, Leo, not hosting a cooking show." He smiled sheepishly. "I know, just trying to be useful." And he was, more than he knew. He was the steady hand on her back when her ankles swelled, the one who rubbed her feet in silence when her breath shortened. He asked gentle questions at appointments, wrote notes when she didn't feel like talking, showed up every time she didn't know she needed him. But the fear, it stayed, because every moment of joy added another layer to the lie he hadn't confessed. He'd stand in the mirror after she slept and say the words he couldn't say to her. "You deserve to know who I am." But he never told her, because the more she trusted him, the more impossible the truth felt. Even as her belly grew, even as they chose a name, even as she began calling the little kicks by nickname, Mickey, he told himself he'd come clean before the birth, before the stakes became flesh and breath. But every time he tried, she smiled at him like home, and he stayed silent. Labor started early. Jen didn't scream. She didn't panic. She simply looked at Leo at 3:14 a.m. and said, "We should go now." He drove, hands shaking lightly on the wheel, but his voice remained calm. Jen cracked jokes between contractions. "You better not cry before I do," she smirked, her brow already sweating. Leo almost laughed. Almost. At the hospital, Jen's strength took over. She breathed. She pushed. She bore down with a grit that startled even the nurse beside her. Leo held her hand, kissed her temple, whispered, "You've got this," until his throat went raw. And then, a cry. Sharp, pure, final. Mickey entered the world with a full head of curls and lungs that demanded attention. Jen reached first. The nurse placed the baby on her chest. Jen looked down, eyes glassed with wonder. Leo looked at them both and broke. He turned his face to the side, but Jen saw the tears. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady. He cried because this was real. He cried because he had never known love this complete. He cried because he didn't deserve any of it. Not like this. Jen looked up, exhausted but steady. "He's perfect," she whispered. Leo nodded, hand trembling as he touched Mickey's tiny foot. And somewhere behind that moment, buried beneath joy, was the truth he hadn't told her. But in that room, under the hum of machines, under the softness of new life, love was loud enough to hold all the silence. In early January 2026, Tethelgard's name returned to the headlines, not for innovation, but investigation. The Department of Commerce had been quietly circling the tech giant for months, reviewing antitrust complaints linked to its acquisition of several data infrastructure firms across state lines. Until that point, Tethelgard had always moved silently. Legally, yes, but always a step ahead of public attention. That changed when a leaked memo surfaced from a boardroom in Geneva. The document wasn't a bombshell, at least not on the surface, but it outlined a strategic consolidation of smaller tech companies under Tethelgaard's control, revealing connections to government data storage, cross-border encryption licenses, and lobbying money that hadn't been declared. The merger had been pre-cleared by lawyers. But the optics? Terrible. Suddenly, politicians who had accepted donations were scrambling to distance themselves. Think pieces flooded major news outlets. Protests began forming in DC and San Jose. And then came the filing dump. Under pressure, Tethelgaard's board preemptively released select merger documents to the public. The intent was to show transparency, but buried in those files were detailed transaction logs, operational timelines, and executive movement reports. For most readers, it meant nothing. For journalists like Jen Van, it was a trail, one with dates, names, locations, names that had disappeared years ago, dates that now felt too close to ignore. And among those files, buried inside a 218-page appendix, was one line that made her eyes freeze on the screen. Temporary relocation and internal data oversight, E-Throne, coastal holding property A4 to 17. Jen blinked. She read it again. A 4-17. Her stomach dropped, because that was the same coastal block she had been writing about when she met Leo, the same zoning file that led her to him in the first place. Jen sat in her home office with her laptop open, the files spread across 3 browser tabs. Mickey slept down the hall. The baby monitor pulsed with soft static. Leo had gone out to buy dinner. She should have felt relaxed, but her fingers hovered over the trackpad, unmoving. She read the names again. E-Throne, block a 4-17. Quarterly board absence, classified strategic leave. Each line cracked open a memory. Leo's avoidance of technology, his delayed response when she mentioned the strange permits, the way he always deflected when she asked about his past. Jen clicked through another file. Project timelines. He disappeared from Tethelgaard's internal records the same month she arrived in that town. She whispered aloud, "No way." But her body already knew. Her chest tightened. Her throat dried. She pulled up her old emails, zoning contacts, legal filings from last fall, and matched the details line for line. They aligned, too perfectly. The mugging that night. Real, but now it felt like a crack in the disguise. The worn jacket, the second-hand furniture, the fake gallery rejections. They didn't seem charming anymore. They felt staged. Jen closed her laptop. She stared into the quiet, and for the first time since Leo kissed her on the forehead that morning, she felt cold. The next morning, Jen did something she hadn't done in years. She printed everything. The files, the merger notes, the address logs, the timelines. She laid them out across the table like a puzzle, each paper anchoring a moment from her memory. Leo burning toast and laughing about it. Leo's friend from the gallery who never spoke about actual paintings. Leo's reluctance to let her do laundry at his place, always offering to drop it off instead. She picked up a photo of them together from the side shelf, her holding Mickey, Leo behind them both, smiling quietly. And the weight of it all settled on her spine. She whispered, "You built a life out of lies." But even as she said it, she heard her own words from months ago echo back, "I never trust men with money, not real money. It changes people." And suddenly, she saw the other side. What had her words done? What had she made him believe about who he could be, and how he had to show up, just to be loved by her? This wasn't just about Leo lying. It was about what her truth had done to him. Still, the damage had been done. She folded the files, stacked them slowly, and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She waited. Because confronting the man you love after finding out he never truly existed, not as he claimed, requires more than anger. It requires stillness. Leo returned just after noon. The moment he stepped into the apartment, he sensed it. The shift. No music. No baby monitor sound. No tea on the table. He walked in cautiously, holding a paper bag of groceries. Jen was seated at the table, a stack of printed pages in front of her. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was low. "I want to know your real name." He froze. Silence. Then, "Jen." She raised one hand. Not to silence him, but to hold him there. In truth, in consequence. "I know," she said. Leo didn't pretend. He didn't try to weave another thread into the lie. He stepped forward, set the groceries down, and pulled out the chair across from her. Then he sat, and with a voice stripped of pride, he said, "Eli Throne." The words settled like dust after a collapse. He didn't rush. He didn't spin. He told her everything, how he'd read her article, how it broke him, how he wanted to know if he could be loved without the layers of his world. He spoke of fear, of pressure, of becoming someone else just to meet her where he thought she needed him. Jen said nothing through all of it. She held Mickey in her arms the whole time, calm, quiet, wide-eyed. And when Leo finished, he looked at her like a man ready to lose everything. Her reply, "You built this life without asking if I wanted it." Leo nodded. Tears didn't fall. Not yet. But they hovered. "I don't hate you," she said. "But I don't know how to trust you." And with that, she stood. She didn't slam the door. She walked to the next room, holding their child, and left him alone with the wreckage of everything he tried to protect. Not as punishment, as clarity, because love doesn't erase betrayal, it demands truth. And now, they'd have to face it, together or apart. Jen didn't cry. She sat in the next room, rocking Mickey gently, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The afternoon light poured through the window, but it felt colorless. Leo hadn't knocked. He hadn't spoken since. And she didn't ask him to. Her grief didn't scream. It simmered, not for the money, not for the name, not even for the deception in itself. It was for the part she never had a say in, the version of their love that was chosen for her before she knew it existed. Jen had spent her life naming systems that stole choice. Gentrification, gatekeeping, politics dressed as inclusion, and now, the man who said he loved her had made the same decision. To protect her from the truth, by keeping it from her entirely. That wasn't protection, that was control. She stood slowly, rocked Mickey against her chest, and whispered, "You deserved better than a love built on hiding." Her voice didn't shake, but her spine felt like stone. She wasn't mourning a man. She was mourning what he took from her when he decided she couldn't love him for who he really was. And worse, when he made that decision based on her own words. Jen had always believed love should stand beside truth. Now, she was facing the weight of what happens when someone loves you, but hides behind your beliefs to do it. Leo didn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of the bed, fully dressed, his hands clasped tight like he was holding on to something that no longer existed. He had already confessed the name, the money, the plan, but what remained unspoken lived deeper. So in the stillness of early morning, he stepped into the living room. Jen sat on the floor, holding Mickey upright as he dozed lightly on her chest. She didn't move. Leo stood quietly, then knelt. "I need to say the rest," he began. Jen didn't speak, but her silence wasn't dismissal, it was space. He took a breath. "I didn't fake everything because I thought you couldn't handle the truth. I faked it because I couldn't handle losing you before I had the chance to earn you." Jen looked at him. No reaction. "I read every word you wrote before I met you. I didn't feel attacked. I felt exposed." He swallowed. "You named things I've been afraid of my whole life. The performance, the emptiness, the way money wraps around love and strangles it before it can even breathe." His voice cracked. "I wasn't hiding just from you. I was hiding from what I let myself become." He looked down. "I wanted you to love me as a man, not a brand, not a headline." Jen's voice finally cut the stillness. "And what if I could have?" He looked up, guilt sharp in his throat. "I didn't know how to believe that. Not after reading your work. Not after realizing how much your truth made mine feel like something dirty. She stared at him. He continued, quieter. You made me want to be real, but I chose the lie anyway. And with that, he stopped. Not because he was finished, but because he knew nothing he added would change what he'd done. Jen nodded once. And that quiet nod felt louder than any judgment could. That evening, after Leo stepped out to take a walk, Jen sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She hadn't touched it since the confrontation. She clicked open a folder titled Features. Inside, dozens of essays. Bold, clear, fiercely written. But her eyes landed on one, The Empty Hearts of the 1%. She opened it. Read the first paragraph. Stopped. For the first time, Jen wasn't reading as the author. She was reading as the woman who had unknowingly raised the walls around someone else's heart. Her words were not wrong. She had built them on fact, on experience, on patterns that harmed real people. But now, she saw something else. She had written from pain, from observation, from conviction, but rarely from room. Room for contradiction. Room for someone like Eli Throne, who had done the damage, yes, but who also wanted to be different. She highlighted one line. True love and power cannot exist in the same room. She whispered aloud, was that true, or was I just afraid? Jen realized she hadn't given Leo a path to be honest. Not in her writing, not in her principles, not even in the soft way she looked at him. Her truth had limits, and those limits had cost them both. She closed the laptop, not out of shame, but out of understanding. She still believed in accountability, but now she also believed in responsibility, for the kind of love her truth left no room for. The next morning, the apartment smelled like warm oats and fresh linen. Leo stood in the kitchen, stirring quietly. He'd barely slept, but he moved with purpose, small, silent tasks that let him stay near without pressing too close. Jen stepped out of the bedroom holding Mickey. She was dressed, hair pulled back, a small diaper bag at her side. Leo turned, instinctively wiping his hands on a towel. She didn't speak. She didn't explain. She only walked to the front door, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and kissed Mickey's forehead. Leo stepped forward. Can we talk? Jen paused, looked at him fully. I'm not leaving forever, she said calmly. But I need space that isn't shaped by lies. Leo's throat tightened. Where will you go? A friend's place. He nodded. Not because he agreed, but because he had no right not to. Jen opened the door, then looked back one last time. Her voice was steady. When you're ready to be honest with yourself, not just with me, we can talk. She stepped out, closed the door softly. No yelling, no slam, just silence. A silence so honest, it didn't need anything else. And inside, Leo stood still. Not broken, but finally aware that love can survive pain, but not without truth. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning. Plain. Official. Heavy. Jen stood in her friend's kitchen, Mickey strapped to her chest, when she read the return address. Federal seal. Department of Justice. She didn't open it right away. She finished feeding Mickey first, changed him, rocked him until his breathing slowed. Only then did she sit at the small table and slide a finger beneath the flap. The word subpoena stood out before anything else. Her name followed. She felt no shock, only weight. This was always coming. She had built her career on exposure, accountability, and public consequence. She had written about powerful men hiding behind systems designed to protect them. Now, one of those men shared her child's face. Jen closed her eyes. This wasn't about loyalty. This wasn't about revenge. This was about alignment. If her voice meant anything, it had to mean the same thing now as it did when she wrote from a distance. She called her editor. I need to testify, she said calmly. No spin, no framing. The editor hesitated. Jen, this is personal. That's why it matters, she replied. That night, after Mickey slept, she reread her own work. Not to prepare a defense, to prepare her spine. She wasn't afraid of telling the truth. She was afraid of betraying herself by avoiding it. The courtroom was quieter than Jen expected. No shouting, no chaos, just the low hum of procedure. Eli sat at the defense table, posture straight, face unreadable. No designer suit, no attempt at charm. When his eyes met hers across the room, he didn't smile. He nodded once, acknowledgement, not expectation. Jen took the stand later that morning. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat without trembling. The questions came slow and deliberate. How did you meet Mr. Throne? Jen answered honestly. When did you learn his true identity? She didn't flinch. After our child was born. A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor pressed. Did you feel deceived? Jen paused. Yes, she said. Because I was denied the choice to love him as he was. Defense counsel tried to soften the narrative. Spoke of fear, of transformation, of intent. Jen listened, then spoke again. Intent doesn't cancel impact. Love doesn't erase responsibility. Eli stared at the table. He didn't object. When it was his turn, he didn't deflect. He admitted the disappearance, the constructed life, the financial cover-ups, no excuses. I wanted to be loved as a man, he said quietly. I chose the wrong way to ask for it. Jen didn't react. She didn't need to. Truth was already doing its work. The story broke before sunset. Headlines clashed across screens. Writer exposes, lover billionaire hid life to win love. Journalist testifies against child's father. Jen turned her phone off. She didn't read the comments, didn't respond to requests. She focused on Mickey's feeding schedule, on walks in the park, on keeping her life intact while the world debated it. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of cruelty. She could have protected him. She used him. She knew all along. None of it mattered. Jen had learned something long ago in Brooklyn. Public opinion is loud. Integrity is quiet. When she did speak, it was brief. One statement: I believe in accountability without cruelty. I believe in love without lies. I testified because truth doesn't change when it becomes inconvenient. That was all. No interviews, no panels. She let the noise burn itself out. 2 weeks later, Jen agreed to meet. Neutral location, supervised, clear limits. Leo arrived early. He looked thinner, older, not broken, but reshaped. Jen arrived with Mickey bundled against her chest. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Leo reached out slowly, asking permission with his eyes. Jen nodded once. He held Mickey carefully, like something sacred and fragile. Tears welled, but he didn't let them fall. He looks like you, he whispered. Jen corrected him gently. He looks like himself. They sat in silence. Then Jen spoke. This doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't fix us. Leo nodded. I know. You can be his father, she continued, but you don't get to shape the story anymore. Not mine, not his. I accept that, he said. She met his gaze. No secrets, no performances. No decisions made for me. He swallowed. I understand. She stood, took Mickey back into her arms. As she turned to leave, Leo said softly, Thank you for telling the truth. Jen paused. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it for him. She walked away, not in anger, not in triumph, but with dignity intact. Would you forgive him? Comment below. When the board meeting ended, Eli stood outside the glass tower that once bowed to his name. He was no longer CEO, no longer chairman, no longer the final signature on billion-dollar decisions. The vote was unanimous. He hadn't argued. His name was still in some documents, but in smaller print now. Legacy stock, not active authority. He had lost the power. But what hurt more was losing the illusion that he had ever been the power. He returned to a quieter space, not the studio apartment he once staged, but something modest, a 2-bedroom rental outside the city. Clean lines, sparse furniture, a slow rhythm. He made his own meals, carried his own bags, missed no one. But Mickey, His lawyers had pushed for image control. He declined. No campaigns, he said. No redemption interviews. Let the silence speak. He began writing, privately, not for praise, but for process. He kept a notebook where he wrote one line every morning. You are not who they knew, but who you choose to become. Eli didn't seek forgiveness from the world. He didn't even expect it from Jen. He focused on being present, on staying consistent, on unlearning how to be admired, and relearning how to be seen. The article she never wanted to write sat open on her screen for 4 straight days. Editors from national platforms flooded her inbox. Some wanted her side. Some wanted the inside story. One even pitched a documentary deal. Jen read the proposals. She sipped her tea, and then deleted most of them. She wasn't here to profit off the pain. Not hers. Not Mickey's. She gave one short interview, audio only. In it, she said, I told the truth because I had to live with myself. I didn't do it for clicks. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because silence is not the same as peace. That clip circulated fast, but Jen refused to let it pull her into the machine. Instead, she returned to smaller stories. She wrote about local childcare programs, about economic gaps in maternity care, about how motherhood sharpened her voice, not softened it. People respected the pivot, but more importantly, she respected herself. She didn't owe the world her full pain. She had already given it her clarity. Now, she was giving herself peace. It started small. Eli would pick Mickey up from Jen's place every other weekend. At first, Jen stayed close, hovering, watching, ready to step in. But Eli didn't flinch. He changed diapers. He sang lullabies. He sat on the floor and let Mickey crawl over his legs like a jungle gym. The handoffs were polite, sometimes quiet, sometimes a little tense. One afternoon, Eli returned Mickey early because of a fever. Jen opened the door, eyes sharp. He's warm, Eli said gently. Gave him a cool cloth, but I thought you should decide what to do next. Jen took Mickey and nodded once. Before she shut the door, she added, Thank you for not guessing. Eli blinked. Of course. Weeks passed. The rhythm steadied. They kept a shared calendar, swapped updates via text, traded baby books, teething toys, and stories about what made Mickey laugh that week. It wasn't easy. There were missed calls, hard conversations, moments where Jen had to breathe before replying. But they both tried, not to fix the past, but to give Mickey a future where both parents showed up, fully. And over time, that mattered more than the history behind them. It happened on a quiet Sunday. They were in the park, the one with the tall trees and the slide Mickey hadn't quite mastered yet. Eli stood a few feet away, arms open, coaxing Mickey forward. Come on, little man, he said, smiling. You got this. Mickey hesitated, wobbled, then stepped down carefully from the slide's base. He toddled across the grass, short legs, determined arms, and reached Eli's knees. Eli scooped him up gently, laughing, cheeks flushed from the cold. Mickey leaned his forehead to Eli's and mumbled it once, clear as daylight. Dad. Time stopped. Eli froze, blinking hard. Jen stood nearby with a cup of coffee, stunned into stillness. She hadn't coached it, hadn't whispered it, hadn't prepared for it. Mickey had chosen. Eli held his son tighter, not enough to startle him, but enough to keep the moment from slipping too fast. Yeah, he said, voice low. I'm here. Jen looked away, not because it hurt, but because it reminded her that even after everything, some truths are born quietly, through showing up, not speaking loud. That day, they didn't talk about the past. They walked home slowly. Jen held the diaper bag. Eli carried Mickey. For a brief moment, the air between them wasn't heavy. It was honest. And that honesty, finally, was enough. The invitation came from a small journalism summit held in D.C. They didn't want a keynote. They wanted a voice that had stayed consistent when it would have been easier to disappear. Jen stood backstage, adjusting the mic clipped to her blouse. She looked out at the seated audience, a mix of journalists, students, community leaders. She wasn't there to defend what she did. She was there to name what so many people avoid. When she stepped up to the podium, the room went still. She didn't read from a script. She began with a breath. I once believed that the truth would always protect me, that if I named the facts clearly enough, nothing else mattered. I was wrong. The room leaned in. The truth is only powerful when we're brave enough to apply it to ourselves, not just others, not just those in power, but the people we love and the people we used to be. She paused. I loved someone who hid from me, and in some ways I helped him hide, not with permission but with my expectations. Another pause. Fear doesn't always sound like shouting. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it sounds like withholding. But when love becomes afraid of being known, it stops being love. There were no dramatic swells of applause. Just eyes watching, listening, receiving. I didn't stand in court to destroy someone. I stood to stay whole, and I continue to speak because silence might feel like safety, but it keeps us from healing. She closed with this. Love doesn't mean erasing failure. It means choosing to move forward with eyes open, not blindly, but bravely. She stepped off the stage. No standing ovation, just earned respect. And in the crowd, far from the front row, a man sat watching. Eli hadn't planned to attend. He wasn't on the guest list. He didn't enter through the front. He sat in the last row of the balcony, ball cap pulled low, coat zipped up high. He didn't come to be seen. He came to listen. When Jen stepped onto the stage, his heart beat differently. Not faster, just heavier. He didn't take notes, didn't record. He just watched the woman who had taught him how much courage lived inside truth and how much destruction waited when it was buried. Every word she spoke reached him like a mirror. Not to shame him, to remind him that even after all the noise, she still stood, with dignity, with clarity, without bitterness. Eli didn't approach her after. He didn't send a text, didn't linger near the green room. He left through the same side door he entered, back into a city that no longer moved around his name, back into a life that no longer needed noise to feel real. He didn't want a second chance. He just wanted her to know that he heard her completely. The envelope came without return address, plain handwriting, neat, familiar. Jen knew before opening it. She waited until Mickey was down for his nap. Then she unfolded the single page inside. Jen, I didn't come to ask for anything. I've asked for too much already. I just wanted to say thank you, not for forgiving me, but for seeing me clearly. You didn't run from the truth. You stood inside it. I didn't know how heavy love could be until I tried to carry it with lies strapped to my back. I also didn't know how light honesty could feel, even when it costs everything. Watching you speak the other night was the clearest I've ever seen you. And that's saying something, because you've always been the light in the room, even when I couldn't look directly at it. I don't need a response. Just know I am grateful. And I'm learning, slowly, quietly, honestly, what it means to be enough without hiding. Thank you for holding the line. Thank you for choosing Mickey's future over my comfort. Eli, no ask, no request, just presence. And after everything, Jen felt no resistance toward the words, only peace. Because this was a man who finally meant every line. Jen stood at the door of Mickey's room, watching him sleep. The letter remained folded in her hand. She didn't cry, didn't hold her chest, didn't pace. She just stood there, a mother, a woman, a whole person. The mobile spun gently above the crib. Mickey's breath came soft and slow. She walked over and set the letter inside the drawer of the changing table, not to forget it, to honor it. The truth was finally complete. Not just the truth of what Eli did, but the truth of who she became through it. She sat in the rocker, let the silence wash over the room. Let the peace of finality, not the kind that closes love, but the kind that opens possibility, settle around her. Her words had met courage, and her silence now wasn't fear. It was rest, earned, lived, quiet, true. 5 years passed like quiet chapters in a well-worn book. Jen was older now, not in age but in pace. Her hair was longer, her laugh more patient, her voice deeper in its calm. She had moved out of the city, bought a small home with a garden that she kept alive, not because she was a gardener, but because it taught her how to tend to things slowly. Mickey had grown. He was now 6, curious, thoughtful, with eyes that studied everything before speaking. He painted the way some kids drew, not for attention, but for expression. They lived simply, not perfectly, but truthfully. Jen still wrote, fewer essays, more reflection. She had shifted her voice toward mentorship, guiding young women writers to hold their voice without apology and without performance. She kept a framed photo in her hallway. Mickey, age 3, with paint on his face, holding a brush like it was a baton. Life no longer moved fast. It moved forward. And that was enough. The invitation came in Mickey's backpack, a folded flyer from his teacher. Spring Expressions, Family Art Showcase and Student Gallery. Mickey handed it to Jen like it was any other handout. "Can we go?" he asked, already walking toward the fridge to place it under a magnet. Jen smiled. "Of course we'll go. You're the star, remember?" He grinned and nodded, cheeks puffed with pride. The event was set in the elementary school gym. Paper butterflies hung from the ceiling. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. Student paintings framed in cardboard borders stretched along the back wall. Parents whispered. Teachers pointed with pride. Kids bounced with barely contained energy. Jen walked Mickey to his section and crouched beside him. His painting showed a house with 2 windows, a tall sun, and 3 figures holding hands. No labels, just colors, balance. As she stood, something shifted in the room. She felt it before she saw him. Eli stood near the far wall, hands in his pockets, chin tilted down, hair a bit grayer than before. He looked older, not from stress, from experience. Their eyes met. No tension, no flinch, just 2 people who had survived a story and now shared a child. Jen gave him a small nod. Eli returned it. Mickey didn't notice. He was too busy pulling his teacher over to see his painting. The principal tapped the mic at the front of the gym. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice bright. "Tonight, we celebrate not only talent, but stories told through color, space, and emotion." She smiled at the crowd. "We'll be recognizing 4 pieces tonight, each selected for creativity, feeling, and the ability to express something words sometimes can't." Mickey clutched Jen's hand, wide-eyed. The first name was called, then the second, then, and our 3rd featured artist, Mickey Van. The room clapped. Jen exhaled. Mickey beamed. He walked up proudly, accepted a small ribbon, took a photo with his teacher. Jen found a seat near the back, far enough to see the stage, close enough to leave quickly if needed. Eli approached slowly. He didn't ask. He simply sat beside her, 1 chair apart. They didn't talk during the rest of the program. They didn't need to. They watched Mickey laugh, hug a friend, and show off his ribbon like it was gold. And, for a brief, beautiful moment, they shared something that didn't need to be repaired, only honored. Not with noise, not with nostalgia, just presence, a shared glance, a soft breath, a memory made without rewriting the past. As the chairs emptied and families made their way toward the refreshment tables, Jen stood to gather her things. Eli stood too. They faced each other, not as former lovers, not as adversaries, but as parents who had walked through fire and come out whole, though separate. "Thank you for coming," Jen said. "I wouldn't have missed it," Eli replied. He looked down for a beat, then back up. "You've raised him well." Jen nodded. "We both did. In our own ways." He didn't press for more, didn't linger. She extended her hand. Eli took it, gently, not with desperation, but gratitude. He smiled, just once, and in that moment, it was enough. No rekindling, no declarations, No fantasy ending. Just two people standing beside the truth, not behind it. As Eli turned to leave, Jen glanced back at Mickey's painting, three figures holding hands. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, love failed when money led, but now it walks beside truth, not ahead of it. And with that, she stepped into the rest of her evening, steady, present, at peace. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in holding on, but in standing still, letting the truth breathe, and choosing to live without rewriting the past. We all carry fear, but love, when honest, gives us a place to set it down. Not every story ends with a return. Some end with understanding, and understanding is its own kind of healing. Thank you for watching. What lessons stayed with you? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that speak, not loudly but truly.